All right, welcome to another short lecture video about a specific type of observation that you might be doing called the checklist. It is probably the one that I would use most frequently. So last unit, we learned a little bit more about kind of the bread and butter observations like anecdotal and running records, things that are really going to be kind of the bottom of the pyramid when you're observing, things you need to learn before you go on to portfolios or assessments or any other types of things we might be learning with children. I would say that the checklist is something that I use more frequently. Might not be the basis of my portfolio, but I would probably use it daily and definitely weekly. What it is just a checklist with predetermined criteria or predetermined indicators, measures, questions, things like that. So it's already been written out. The questionnaire has been written by you, your school, your program, a state, California, a federal government, something like that. So somebody's already done it. Typically it's milestones, and typically it gives us a sequence of development. So one milestone would be like crawl and then walk and then run and then jump. That might be in a checklist of physical development. And it should typically show progress over time. That when you did it in January, the baby could crawl, and when you did it in March, the baby could walk, and when you did it in June, the baby could jog, and then the baby could run. You would see how the progress has changed, and the milestones have been met. Some examples of checklists are the ones that I use most are the ones to the left is a picture. It is the ages and stages questionnaire. There's two of them. One does social and emotional and one does kind of cognitive and physical. I use these in my programs as a teacher every year. And you give it to the parents and the parents fill it out and the parents give you a sense of what the child's doing at home, because that's really important too, to know what a child is doing at home, what milestones is the child meeting at home, and then also it identifies areas of need. So if the parents were concerned about social or emotional or talking or physical, then we could use this to get them some services, maybe in special education or with a pediatrician, something like that. I also used the child observation record quite a bit, and then work sampling systems as well. A great thing, some of the limitations about it is it doesn't preserve details. I would often write details down on it when I am using checklists. I would put detail either in the margins or next to it, just because I probably have a terrible memory. So I'm always trying to write down details because I'm afraid that I'm going to forget. But it doesn't preserve the raw data. So unless you videotaped it and then did a checklist, you wouldn't really have that kind of clip or information or details. It's just a checklist of what either the parent says or the teacher says in that moment. Decisions could be influenced by personal bias. So if it was a yes or no question, how you fill that out could be influenced by bias. Sometimes I feel like checklists are a little bit better with that because it's yes or no, and we can't put our own particular worldview in always, but then in other ways we can, if our education level or our understanding level makes us not understand the question, then our own kind of personal sense of the world could also be in there. There's no independent opinion. Typically, it's usually yes or no, met the milestone, didn't meet the milestone, this is safe, this is healthy, something like that. And so the person who's writing it, their own bias is part of it. When we're using a checklist, it's best to have it as a PDF fillable, and then you can keep track of it, and you could do it every month for the child. And you could see over 12 months how the child changed. So typically we do it, and then we put it in the child's e-portfolio. And then we use it to plan curriculum in the areas that they're not attained. So let's say they're not meeting a milestone, then we would put in their own personal record. And then in the classroom, we would build activities to help that child start to crawl or start to run, something like that. So we might also find by having the ages and stages with the parents, that the parents have a similar concern about the milestones that their child is not meeting. And then we would use that checklist observation to arrange for services as well. We also know that the checklist is great for our environments. And I'm going to talk a lot more about that. It's one of the ways that I assess my environments. meaning the classroom and the playground, all the time. Some of the advantages is it's very efficient because it's a predetermined set of criteria. So I'm not having to make up the observation. I'm just looking for milestones, or I'm looking for safety features, or I'm looking for a good environment. It's typically comprehensive, and I'll show you an example of one that we would do in an environment that covers so many areas. It's actually kind of staggering. So you're looking at your classroom environment, but you're looking in 7 kind of sections with all of these indicators under them. So it's great that way. It allows for individual documentation of the child. It allows for classroom documentation, safety documentation, and it really kind of helps us understand where a child is and be able to track it very easily and very time efficient over a long period of time, hopefully the time that we have with the child. But if we're using technology and we've got a PDF that's fillable and it's taking us 5 minutes to assess their milestones out on the playground with running and jumping and bike riding, and then we're doing that every single month, we have a clear kind of idea of where the child is. Once again, we lose that detail and that raw data because unless we're also videotaping it. It could be biased by the recorder, although I feel it's more biased by the person who came up with the checklist, meaning that we have to buy and use checklists or create our own that don't have bias within them. And then if you do have a lot of items to check, it can be time consuming. So there's an environmental rating scale I'm going to show you guys in a few minutes. I only do this yearly. It is quite time consuming, but once again, it's a yearly task that teachers and probably a preschool director would do together in order to get a sense of their classroom and make a plan for improvement. So what we use the checklist for, a lot of times we use it for health and development. So we want to track it kind of quantitatively. So we want to get a sense of the numbers, the height, the weight, the objective things that the child can do. We know it's affected by genetics. You know, if your parents are only 5 feet tall, your height is probably a little bit predetermined. You're probably not going to be 6'4". So we understand that, but we also understand prenatal care plays into it, healthcare and being able to afford healthcare, environmental factors, the maturation of the child, how mature they are, how they are maturing, and then social factors and economics. So we would use checklists to understand fine motor development. So I have a picture up here of a little girl using her fine motor skills to do some art. And so we would often use a checklist to see how is she holding a pen? How is she holding scissors? How is she using crayons? Is this developmentally appropriate? If it's not, we're going to share that data with the parents. It's an area of concern for us. And then we're also going to plan in the classroom, how can we help her cut with scissors? So we often use checklists for that. We use samples of the child's work to support that as well. So examples of, in March, this is how she could cut. She could only cut around the paper, edges of the paper. But by June or July, she could cut straight through the paper. And then we might also do some short anecdotal reports as well in order to really get a sense of physical growth and development. But checklists, because they're easier, more time efficient, and often online or on a PDF, can be a really great way to get a continuing snapshot of how a child is. So we love the checklist because it supports responsive or intentional teaching. So what that kind of means is that you are understanding where all the children in your classroom are developmentally. You're understanding their family structure and how their family is. And then you are taking that information and allowing it to influence how you set up your weekly lesson plans, your daily lesson plans, and kind of your weekly, monthly curriculum. We arrange the environment. So if we were looking at physical, as my last example, we would allow for gross motor movement, being able to move our arms and legs and get outside and climb and jump. And then also our fine motor, continuing to work on some of those cutting skills that my last kind of checklist showed was an area of concern for quite a few children. Maybe we need to buy or request new equipment and props, different types of scissors, different types of paper, having occupational therapists come in and support us in different ways that we can strengthen kind of the muscles in our hands so that we have that better fine motor development. And then helping children understand why they should be healthy and be moving their bodies, and then also supporting the parents, maybe with an email home about fine motor skills, what they are, how you can support it at home. All of that would be really helpful. I wanted to show you guys the ways that we use checklists for observations. And one of them is called the Early Childhood Rating Scale, or ECHRS is the kind of acronym. We love checklists to support environmental safety and quality. So the last program I ran, we actually had the lead, we had a teacher in each classroom, and then the janitor do a daily safety checklist. So the maintenance guy, whenever his shift was, he would walk around, he would make sure that, let's say we use bleach in the classroom, but he would always make sure with that checklist that it was behind closed doors, locked in a shed, that children didn't have any access. Obviously we don't want to have children, having access to bleach. And then the teachers would also do it. Like a rug hadn't come up and was a tripping hazard. The sand is always kind of put back in the sandbox. Once again, it's a tripping hazard. There's no standing water, things like that. So every day they did a very short checklist. It was usually about 5 minutes. Sometimes it would show an issue in the classroom, and the teachers would bring it to the maintenance person's attention, and then they would, work on fixing the rug so that it didn't slip up and, a little toddler would fall over it, or an adult either. And then we also did this ECHRS, which is what I have right here. And I'm going to show you guys another example. It's a tool to assess the quality. There's quite a few areas. So we look at space and furnishings. So just like, what's the furniture like? Is there enough place to run around? Is there space to kind of chill out and relax? Personal care routines. Can you take a nap? Can you eat? Is there a place where you're eating healthy and safe? Language reasonings. How do we kind of start support speaking, learning, talking, cognitive? Activities. Do we have fine motor? Do we have blocks? Do we have sand and water? Do we have too much TV? All of that type of stuff. Or too many computers for 2-year-olds. Interactions. Supervision of the children, discipline and boundaries for the children. Then we look at program structure. Do they have enough time to play? Do they have enough time to sleep? And then the last one is for parents and staff. Do parents and staff have provisions so that they are communicated with, that they can learn more about the program? So these are type the areas. So you can see there's 43 things, or sometimes it's 35, but between 35 and 43 indicators. So you can see why this one's a little bit longer, and I only did this yearly. So I'd have the teachers use this particular ECHRS. It's about, it's about 50 pages, and it goes into detail into each of these, and then it kind of rates it 1 to 7. And then you would say, the teacher would self-assess and say, I'm at a 6, and I'd say, I think you're at a 5. Agree to disagree, but definitely we want to get to 7. 7 was the perfect number. I know I've always felt like it should be 10, but the ECHRS is on a 1 to 7 scale, 1 being not good, very bad, to 7 being phenomenal, the best program you've ever been. So if we were getting a 3, 4, or 5, we might want to set up a plan of action so that we would be better in that section. So if we were looking at books, so I've got a picture of a book center, we would want to ensure quality by making sure that we got a 7 or a 6 or maybe even a 5 in that area. 2s, 3s, and 4s, we definitely want to improve by maybe getting more books, a diversity of books, cartoon and real life, and about different people, and about science, and about math, and about reading. And then we would want to make sure that the area where we can feed is comfortable and inviting, that parents feel like they can stop and read a book, that we're educating them on why children's literature is so important. If we didn't kind of hit any of those, our plan of action would be to hit one of those. So then throughout the year, how would we have something that's measurable, is achievable, we could get it done in a time, and that would even kind of fit our budget. So if we don't have the budget for brand new books, how can we go out and get new books that we feel that we need to kind of add to our program? So we would come up with like maybe 1 or 2 goals that we would want to have done in 3 months, and then 6 months, and then in a year, hoping that when we did this again the next time in like 12 to 13 months, we would have a really good score in that, because we set up our environments to be supportive of all children. So that's an example of how we would use our checklist for environments. So in this lecture, we've kind of talked about ways that we can use it to support development, giving you some concrete ideas for physical development. And I've also gone over the ways that we can use checklists for our environments, for safety, for health, and making sure that we have quality environments that kind of support classroom practice. All right, I will see you guys more online. Bye.